Okay, welcome to another Glen Yaps video. Unfortunately, this is a sad video for today. As the news reported on the internet that Neil Peart had died, we got the news yesterday, late yesterday, but apparently he died on January 7th of brain cancer. And basically, to say it was a shock is an understatement. I mean, the internet today, the next day after the announcement, the internet's just full of Neil Peart posts of his playing, what they thought of him, the influences that both Neal and the band have given so many musicians, myself included. For me, I was a late bloomer to the Rush thing. It wasn't intentional. It just other bands I focused on before that, before I even actually heard Rush. Very first Rush song I ever heard was Fly By Night. And then friends just kept pumping me up on this band Rush, and I started absorbing their music. I didn't really get into them solid until actually a lot of their heyday, they're the ones that, the albums that put them over the top, like 2112 and like the live album All the World's a Stage. I didn't get into them until after that. And but once I got into Rush and their music, I was absorbed into it. I couldn't let it go. I went backwards and got all the back catalog and just listened to it, and then enjoyed the music and practiced to it and learned many of their songs. And then I moved forward till the very end of the band in 2015 when they retired. And I loved everything they did. So the evolution of Rush, I went with them. Some people dropped off after certain periods of Rush. I went through them. I always learned something. I always enjoyed something about their music, each album. Their final album, I just loved, and it was a great way to go out into retirement. Unfortunately, now we know why. With Neil Peart passing away of brain cancer, it suffered 3.5 years with that, which kind of goes in the time frame of 2015 when they called it quits. My influence, what drew me to Neil Peart, a lot of the drummers at the time, they were great drummers. There was great music out there. Something about, obviously, the band being Canadian, it was something that a lot of us in Ontario could easily focus on. It's like, wow, these guys are making waves, they're changing music, and they're like, in my case, they're less than 500 miles away where they were, where they were based in Toronto. But for me, Neil Peart, he was more of a technician when he placed his drum parts in the song. He took the care, this is what I get from it. The band, Alex and Getty, would write these songs, present them to Neil to do both the drumming and the lyrical part. They might have a drum machine and just to give a basis. But Neil Peart would, like the other two guys, would take the time to place the drum pieces he came up with throughout the song. They weren't just like when you went to see them in concert, those parts were always there. Some drummers choose to change it up all the time. That's fantastic. That's more of a jazz mentality, or a looser type of playing. But something about that precision and the the idea that he thought out each piece of his drum part to coincide with a certain part of that song, to make it blend, still do some important drumming, some very technical, very inspirational parts in these songs without basically making it sound like a drum solo. There's nothing wrong with playing basic and in a complicated song. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not getting into that, but Neil Peart just took the time to place his pieces of drum work in these songs to accent his two friends. And the more I listened to the music, the more I could see that happening throughout. I mean, there are people that don't like Rush because of whatever reason. Either too busy, the music wasn't danceable. Some people didn't like Geddy's voice. His voice changed throughout the years. But for me, I dissected the music. I didn't just hear the face value and then yes or no, I liked it. I took the song, I gave it time, I sat down with it. I even put headphones on to listen to each one of these songs, to hear the depth of what they were doing. There was so much going on in Rush songs that most listeners that are not musicians don't really hear. But for Neil and my taste or my love of Neil's playing was because of that factor. He was a technician. He was presented the material, and he may have written it along with the band. I mean, I've read articles where the odd time that's happened, where the whole band just jammed, and that was the magic that happened, and they just, got all of the little flubs out and tightened it up and presented it. But for the most part, you could tell he really worked at his craft. He loved what he was doing, and he wanted to make the song better. And I think maybe that happened because he was a lyricist for the band also. He knew that the musical parts might build up in this, have a little bit of a little more musician action, and then it would drop down. And he wrote the words, so maybe that was the way he styled it around his own words. That's something, that you'll have to read in the Rush archives and see. But that was my take on it. The other thing that influenced me about Neil Peart is his consistency. Something that he planted the seed in me. Before that, I mean, I've recorded myself when I was a kid. From the very first day I had drums, I have recordings. So for me, the laughable part is I can hear my evolution in playing. And before Neil Peart, it was, in my word, a mess. I was into drummers like Keith Moon and stuff, and I love Keith Moon. So did Neil Peart. And it's weird that we love everything about Keith Moon, his energy and his fills and his cymbals crashes that were out of place with other in comparison to other drummers, and he created his own signature. The problem, and his drumming fit those songs, but he never played the same way twice. That's a bonus in some ways because you might capture an energy even outside of the recording, but in a live situation. But the downfall is when it goes bad, it goes really bad, and that happened with Keith Moon a lot. But still, one of my faves. With Neil Peart, he took it a different way. Now, I'm not saying other drummers didn't do it at that time, but Rush, they had everything going for them musically. I'm not saying famous-wise. There was just something about their music where I hear other bands, like I might hear the band Yes, and I love them too. But Rush just seemed to click or fire on all pistons. They took bits and pieces of all these other bands And what might have been flaws or maybe slight imperfectionism, they got rid of those, reworked it, and it was almost like the perfect package, in my opinion. And so the consistency thing with all of them, to me, helped put them at the next level. I'm not saying that Neil Peart is the best drummer of all time. That's a statement that it's a falsity, because there are drummers out there that we don't even know about that are in basements that are phenomenal, and then all of a sudden they pop out into the public view and you're like blown away. But to me, Neil Peart, his creativity and the band's creativity, and their whole way of living, they just took that to a new level. And because they took their musicianship, their songwriting, their way of life, and never varied from that, stayed as a nucleus of friendship for decades, it put them up here. Other bands, very few, except for maybe like King's X, where these bands are soulmates. When you put that up here, other bands, in my opinion, look silly in comparison, trying to achieve fame. Rush, I mean, they just kind of settled in. They did it their way, and I couldn't be happier. As for Neil Peart's lyrics, I bought his books. If you read the book about his journey after the loss of his daughter and his wife, reading that book, you can feel the pain that man went through. It was a hard book to read because it's a depressing book. But if you want to know about a human being going from down, being at the lowest point in your life, fame meaning nothing, but losing your two loved ones, well, within a year of each other, if I remember correctly, one in a car accident, one to cancer, to read that book and how he and his friends stuck with him, and he elevated back to play drums again, because most people in that state of mind, they probably wouldn't have survived. He just found he just found a way to do it, and I'm sure Alex and Getty, they're the bandmates and good friends, they helped. So that was inspirational to me, because we've all had hard times, we've all lost loved ones, and just to read that book changed me. I admired him. I couldn't have cared less if he, drummed like crap for the rest of the albums after coming back to the band. That, just to get from down that low up to back into a high point again, was phenomenal. And on the tragic side, he ends up passing away of cancer, and his wife passed away from cancer. He was remarried, had a daughter. I think she's 10 years old, presently 10 years old. His first daughter's in her teens. And the sad part is Neil Peart had 2 attempts to see his kids grow up and become adults and develop in their own person, their own lives, and tragically that never happened with his second daughter either, so he lost out. So that hits home. Like, that's the sad part of this, along with obviously losing Neil. But if you think about it, he never got to see his first daughter. He fought back, had a new wife, a new family, a whole new start, a whole new run with the band after a hiatus, I think of 4 or 5 years. Came back, and he still couldn't achieve seeing his child become an adult. I mean, I was devastated. Tears, everything, because he was everything to me. One of my top 5 drummers, like Buddy Rich, was the ultimate. It's funny, you see your heroes as immortal. Buddy Rich to me just seemed like God to me, and Neil Peart, same thing. Dave Weckl. Like I say, I have my faves, but Neil Peart was definitely in the top 5. But then when you realize they're mortal and they pass away, it's just hard to take in. A lot of people out there don't understand when a musician becomes totally focused on a greater musician, what that means to them. It's almost like an IV from that person into your own arm, that you want some of that talent to come in to your own body. I wish it was that easy. Like for me, like these drummers that I mentioned, even Keith Moon, you try for years and years and years to emulate them. You never really can, because no two drummers are alike. But you try and emulate them and absorb what makes them tick. Then your other heroes, you try and take bits and pieces and try and mold it together into your own identity. And I've always had the frame of thought that all my idols, they were great for a reason, and I can only compliment them because I will never be them. There's something special about these people that that change an entire music industry. Like Neil Peart, Buddy Rich, they changed the ground drummers walk on. And if you don't find that there's any influence from these drummers, I think you're either not digging in deep enough. It's possible your tastes are way somewhere else, and you have your own favorites. But I still think you're missing something. There's great drummers that get recognitions, but then there's the elite, right? There's a difference there. Neil Peart was one of the elite. For the whole package I mentioned earlier. It's not just his drumming, the whole package. So, for me, I got into Rush late, like I said. I had the Moving Pictures album, but it wasn't the first one I bought. I actually got into Rush on the Signals album. And obviously I heard Fly By Night, but I never actually owned a Rush album until Signals, and then I went backwards. Sure, I played songs, off the radio. I recorded stuff like Fly By Night and stuff. But the actual first album I owned was Signals. So I was late getting into it, so that's the early 80s. Then when Grace Under Pressure came out, Grace Under Pressure to me was the album that changed it for me. I was listening to the band The Police, and I could hear Rush being influenced by the band The Police, or at least Neil Peart and Geddy. But I think as a whole, there were some Police influences on Grace Under Pressure. That brought me where Signals and Grace Under Pressure, where I was just 100% Rush crazy. I'll admit it. Even the drum set I used, I posted a picture online where I went out and I bought a Tama drum set, and it wasn't the same. It was the same company, Tama. It wasn't the same model because the one thing about Neil Peart, even though he was sponsored by Tama at that time, his drums were custom made just for him. So there was tricks to his drums. We got the model, the regular model. There was like a couple of lines that mimic the Neil Peart thing. But his kit was custom made. The shells were custom made to him. So you're never going to get Neil Peart sound just from buying a store-bought kit. But we went nuts. There was a bunch of local drummers. We all went nuts. We'd all have the same kit, or the same looking kit, big red kit, cherry wood, all that. We were just totally nuts. I went really nuts. So I got the percussion. I got orchestra bells, not orchestra bells, but the glockenspiel, and all these wood blocks and cowbells. And I didn't have the orchestra bells, which are the big bells you see in some of his earlier, because they're like friggin' expensive, and I wouldn't have had room anyways. But I was just totally absorbed. And then to top it off, I started learning bass back then, and I was doing all the Geddy Lee lines. So I'd practice all the Geddy Lee bass lines, record them on a tape, and then drum to me playing Geddy Lee's bass lines. It was that crazy. I was nuts. I know of a few other players, that want to start a Rush Cone band. That probably happened so much back in the 80s. Everybody wanted to play Rush. So the drum set behind, I don't know if you can see it, is a continuation of of the Neil Peart plant into my DNA, we'll say. A lot of people go, "Oh, you can do everything on a small kit." No, you can't. The thing is, the big kit, you have to think of it as a guitar with multiple strings, as a keyboard with multiple keys, notes, lots of notes. The drum set has pitches, percussion pieces. The whole idea of having different sized drums is a pitch sing, like you're playing the white and the black keys. If you listen to Neil Peart when he does drum fills, it coincides sometimes with the bass notes that Geddy is using. I don't know if Neil tuned his drums to pitches to match certain notes that the guys are playing in the band. I know I personally got that whacked out about that. I was in a band called Thans's Cole with a good friend, Paul Tikkanen, and we used to write really weird, very Rush style influenced original music. And there was a time where I was taking the drums and tuning them to a certain pitch to accent a guitar lead that my guitar player was doing. So I would do the pattern. I was that crazy, but it had its place, and it actually sounded very cool. So again, Neil Peart influence to connect all the different toms and the bells and whistles in his drum set to coincide with the song. So if you think that you can play everything on a big kit on a small kit, on a technical level, without those sounds and pitches, yeah. But you're thinking small. You're not thinking like in 3D, we'll say. Like a 4-piece kit is not as melodic as a big kit if the drummer is playing it for a melodic reason, like Neil Peart, like Terry Bozzio. There's a few other drummers that do the same. So that's where Neil Peart captured my attention. And then, as you see, I got into recording. I owe that to Rush also. I always read articles that they always said they were on their last chance for stardom before they hit with 2112. And 2112, they just said, screw you, we're doing it our way. If we're going to go out, we're going out our way. And had the record producers and all that listened to them before that, they probably would have been famous earlier. So when that album came out, of course the critics didn't get it, and definitely the record companies, like the big company managers, they didn't get it. We got it. And so when I went back in the catalog and listened to 2112, I was like, how the hell did I miss that? But up here in Canada and small towns, the Rush thing only poked little holes in our radio stations. Our radio stations sucked, I'll be honest. They suck. They still suck. When you got a Canadian band this good and you throw it to the side, don't even give it a chance, you want to hear the basic 4-on-4 simple, boring 3-chord wonder songs, but not at least put a blend of this in, you know what, to the radio stations. I'll be honest, I never listen to radio stations here anymore. It was sickening. I myself and a bunch of other musicians felt the same way. It's like, you guys are ignoring one of Canada's best rock bands. And we used to call in, try and get them to play it. And, even to this day, Caravan was one of their last great songs on their last album, and it's like, you think you hear that on the radio station? Not a chance. The song is a work of art. There's so much going on that song. It's just an amazing song. Rush went out in retirement on a high note. That last album is phenomenal. Clockwork Angels. So no praise for the radio stations for ignoring Rush, but Rush found a way to make holes to get their message through, and we got it. Thank God for underground. You know, the underground will always find these bands. So even my CD collection back here, Porcupine Tree, another band that's ignored by radio. They're like, in the Rush vein. Beautiful, great, strong songs, depth, and the radio here. Who's that? You know, it doesn't sound like the Black Eyed Peas or other crap. So, anyways, for me, Neil Peart, my hero. I'm devastated. Like, I couldn't believe it. My guitar player came on the chat room. We have a chat room for our band, and he threw that at me last night. I thought, no, it's got to be, to quote Donald Trump, fake news. I didn't believe it. I mean, 67. You know, the only thing we all knew about as fans was that he had arthritis issues, and believe me, I'm playing drums, and if you had arthritis, that is a tough thing. And he would do these tours of 3-hour shows. So that was the only thing we knew about, and I didn't believe it. As soon as my guitar player told me, I was like in denial, and I'm sure most people are in denial that are fans. And I took to the internet, and then I didn't even believe the main media. I was going to all these underground rock music sites that are loyal to these bands. They're not assholes like mainstream media, and I couldn't believe it. I was devastated. I'm sure many of us cried. I know I did. I was like, it was brutal. It's like you dedicate your life to these bands and your heroes, and you never want to see them stop giving you that direction. You know, it's like a great teacher. You know, I've had great teachers. I'm glad I'm still in contact with some of my great teachers. But in music, you want these heroes to last forever. And unfortunately, like yesterday, you realize they're mortal. as we all are. So for me, the gear behind me, I owe that to Rush. It's like they gave me a reason to think, breathe, create. I will never be on their level. Most of us know we weren't going to be on that same level. Most of us realize what they are giving us is the ability to create our own way. And I've done that now for 42 years. And I can honestly say that Rush and Neil Peart are the pinnacle to have given me a direction musically. Now there are tons of other bands after Rush or during the Rush time that took me in different directions also. But they are the band that made me stop and realize I have to think about what I'm doing rather than just go in and drum a flurry of notes and just think of it as fun. And fun is just a small part of music for me. And there's nothing wrong with that, just being fun with your friends and stuff. But for me, I took it as a serious goal, quest. I can't think of the right words because, like I say, I'm just numb right now from this. I'm rambling like an idiot, but I'm losing my voice just from talking to friends. I mean, when the news came out, the phone was ringing off the wall. We're all drummers they're close knit, especially in this community. And a Rush album back in the day was like, how can I explain it? It was like the Holy Bible coming down right in your hands. That's just that's my spin on it. And it was like you looked at it, and first of all, it was a piece of art. You flipped it over, you looked at the sleeve, you read the lyrics, and then it was like the day you put that on the turntable, you played it, and you always knew a Rush album was going to be a religious experience, both sonically, musicianship-wise, song structure-wise. It had it all. It was like you could see beams of light on that album as you put it on the turntable. And that's my take on it. And you would play it, and each song you would just sit there and just absorb, right? And you knew that you weren't going to hear everything on the first pass. You'd play it over, something else would pop into your head. Even now, playing Rush songs to celebrate Neil Peart, I hear stuff I never heard before. It's a totally different spin on it. There's so much buried deep. I find that with the Beatles too. Beatles, to me, the ultimate band, my favorite band of all time. But yeah, it's just strange. So last night, I was listening when I actually had to play last night for a show. And believe me, I did not want to play. When someone that's inspirational to you passes away, last thing I want to do is play drums. But I had to do a show last night, so it was very tough, because I knew everybody in the audience, they didn't know. They probably didn't care. But for me, it's hard because I'm looking at this drum set, and it's like I'm playing for this audience. I'm here playing for this audience, having a good time. I'm here because of my hero, or one of my heroes, but in this case, Neil Peart. So when I got home last night at like 3 a.m., I was like so bummed out, depressed, and sad. So I started playing Rush songs, and I put on the song "Losing It," which is off the Signals album, which to me, like I say, Signals was that album that got me full bore into Rush. Losing It has beautiful lyrics. It's got absolutely phenomenal violin part, and that song means a lot to me. It's one of my favorite Rush songs. I mean, I have tons. It's hard to pinpoint one, but that one, especially at this point in time, because of Neil's passing, the song "Losing It" means everything to me. It's one of those songs where Neil he wrote the lyrics, beautiful lyrics. The song was a departure for them. There's synthesizer in it, violin. If you listen to Neil's drum parts, he's very subtle for most of the intro part, accents, letting the song breathe. And then as the violin starts to build, there's like this giant crescendo. And if you listen to his drum parts, building that up, they're phenomenal. And so I listened to the studio version, and then the song was not, at the time, was one that they never played live. In fact, and they didn't play it live, I think, until, I think they played it in 2013, but they definitely played it on their last tour. And they even had the original violin player do the Toronto show, but they had another violin player who was just sick, phenomenal. And he just brought that song up to amazing level. I was like just blown away. If you ever see the concert footage of it, it's just, I'm speechless because of it. I watched it so many times last night. It was like I lost count. I can't even count how many times I played that song last night. So the drumming part is phenomenal, and for me, it's my send out to Neil Peart fans. The song "Losing It." So, but like I say, my drum set. I love the big drum sets. I play 4-piece kit most of the time now live, mainly because the stages are too small. If I could bring this out, I would. But in my recording studio, this is my tool to expression. I will always play this bigger setup. The drum set I had in the 80s for 10 years, I still own that kit. It looks like Neil Peart's drum set. I had actually tried to sell it, and I think, and it wasn't, it never sold. I had people wanting it. I had people, put money on it, and they never come and get it. I think it was meant to be. This today, being the day after the news of Neil Peart's passing, I decided the kit is going to stay as a memento, and when I die, I don't care where it goes, but until then, it just it's like an accent to my journey because of the Neil Peart and Rush influence. This kit here is like a continuation, and up in the corner, I'll show you in a sec, one of my favorite pictures of Rush from the early days when Neil Peart had the big kit with all the orchestra bells. He went into electronic drums along with his acoustic drums. That's another costly venture. I've got electronics on this kit. You don't really see them. They're not actual secondary kit facing backwards like Neil Peart, but throughout this kit there are small trigger pads that trigger phrases through a keyboard in the back. There's also a pad system that has 8 pads on it that has percussion and keyboard phrases. And yeah, I went crazy with it. I'll probably never use it with a band ever again because music has been so dulled down to stagnant levels. But for me, when I write my own material, I utilize this. Whether people listen to that music is another thing. I don't really care. I just love the creative factor, and owe it all to Neil Peart and Rush. So I'll show you that picture. I'll probably use another camera because this one's stationary, and that's all I'm going to talk about because I'm losing my voice. Thanks for listening. Like I say, I'm to say the word gutted from the death of Neil Peart is an understatement. I know a lot of local drummers feel the same. I talked to them last night before my show, and everybody's just numb. They just can't believe it. 67 in this day and age, way too young. And it's just, yeah, we all feel the pain, especially when we didn't know he was really as sick as that. So, thanks for listening, and we'll hopefully not lose any more of our heroes in the next little while. For me, John Lennon was one of my ultimate heroes, and I feel exactly the same. Exactly the same way. So you cry, you reflect, you think back of your journey and your own journey, and how much their music got you through things, and how many hours you practiced Neil Peart songs. I practiced them and practiced them. You know, I loved it. I'd always try and talk bands into doing Rush songs, and actually had one band do quite a bit of Rush. So thanks to Spy vs. Spy with Ryan Oya, Kenny Luxon, and George Routledge for giving me that opportunity to play that music, because no other bands could pull it off or wanted to do it, put it that way. So that's a great part of my life that I will cherish. Anyways, I'll shut up now. Thanks for listening. Hey, Glen here on this sad day, learning of Neil Peart passing away January 7th. We only found out late yesterday. The world, that is, world of musicians and Rush fans. Anyways, I did a video of me yapping about my experiences, and this is just kind of like the final little part of just showing my Neil Peart addiction. This is my Yamaha kit. For years I used a Tama kit just like his, that's red. Not the same model, but this drum set here is a Yamaha one, the top line recording series I've had since I think it was 87. This kit is influenced from Neil Peart, and also Dave Weckl, who I'm also a big fan of. Two of my heroes. My other hero, Keith Moon. My other hero, John Lennon and Jimi Hendrix. I have many drum heroes. My top 5, though, are Buddy Rich, Neil Peart, Dave Weckl, Vinnie Colaiuta, and then Terry Bozzio was a huge influence, and Ringo Starr, and so many more. So to show how much I'm a Rush fan, I always have a Rush book behind my kit, always. I've always had Rush posters up in my studio of Neil Peart. I have lots of Neil Peart stuff. They were all taken down when I rebuilt my studio. They're in storage. I decided to go with this beautiful black and white picture of Rush right next to me, because Rush influenced me on so many levels, musically, drum wise, spiritually, I guess. But I love this picture. And like I say, this drum set, It has electronics on it too. You don't see them. They're not like a full electronic kit facing backwards like Neil Peart. I chose to use trigger pads. So there are trigger pads in parts of the drums that trigger keyboard phrases. And over here, there's electronics for the drum pad, and you can see some of the triggers down there. So anyways, the video I made earlier that's going to join to this is pretty long. I'll probably have to edit it because I talk too much as usual. Very sad day for me and many other drummers. Lots of tears. Like I say, most people don't understand a musician's love of their musical heroes. It's like having a great teacher that takes you to the next level in school. That's that you understood, and he made you or she made you elevate yourself, elevate you to a new level. Kind of jibber jabbering. I don't know what the hell I'm saying, but anyways, that's the scoop. Just sucks. The guy was amazing, and it's sad that he suffered the last 3 years with brain cancer. We didn't know that, but when you think back, it's like horrible. So, peace to all my fellow drummers out there that are Neil Peart fans. We can all mourn his passing and celebrate his great career and what he's done for us. And he's done a lot. Thanks for listening.